So my role with this exhibition, as with all of our big winter and summer exhibitions, is that I have been supporting Dr. Ted Gott, who's our Senior Curator of International Art, and Dr. Miranda Wallace, who's our Senior Curator of International Exhibitions, as well as our wonderful guest curator, Katie Hansen. I have been supporting them in realising this project. So it's been fantastic.
How long have you been working on it?
Well, given that it was originally had its short-lived presentation in 2021, it's been almost 8 years now that we've been working with the MFA Boston on this show, and it's extremely rare to be able to secure this kind of checklist of works a second time. So we're very lucky that they wanted to continue that partnership and give these works their due and allow as many people as possible to see them. I think there are a few factors. Number one, I think that because they broke the rules and created these works that were extremely connected with the natural environment or the urban environment, we see both represented in the exhibition. I think that there is this enduring quality that they broke the rules, they sort of bucked the establishment in order to produce works that were very much connected with modern life. And I think even though these works were painted 150 years ago, or less or more, it's amazing actually how we can still relate to them.
We really should make the point though that the Impressionist school, those painters actually wanted to be part of the salon, didn't they? It was because of the successive rejection that they decided to set up their own exhibition.
Exactly, to have their own independent exhibitions where they could have more agency in terms of how their works were displayed. Ted Gott mentioned just now that, these artists rejected the dark red maroon walls of the salon in favour of, white frames and pastel-coloured walls. So there was this freedom that exhibiting independently really gave them to experiment.
And they represented a shift of focus, didn't they?
Yes, literally, yeah.
From biblical, mythical, royal, formal, stately subject matter to more everyday subjects. And
well, that's quite connected to the technique that they were, it's become one of the hallmarks of the movement, painting en plein air or in the open air, directly in front of nature. Big way that often, engages in colour theory in different ways, or sort of, the emotional quality of colour. And then, the famous saying, when you step back, it all comes together, but when you're up close, you can see all of this fantastic brushwork. But no, they were completely connected to modern life. They weren't interested in the mythological and religious subjects that had dominated painting for, centuries.
Now, one of the fun things about researching Impressionist painters is that almost every one of them is identified as the father of Impressionism. Now, I don't know how meaningful a label that is, given how interconnected and how they all are, and how they influenced each other. But if one were to be forced into a decision
of who is the father?
Yeah, I would put to you, it's a toss-up between Pissarro and Boudin.
I would say Pissarro within the movement. Why? Because Boudin was certainly influential, but far more on the young Claude Monet. They had a very close working relationship, and Boudin, was certainly the one to encourage him to paint outdoors, en plein air, but then the Barbizon painters were doing the same thing in a different context. They were encouraging artists like Renoir to also paint outdoors and in front of nature. So I think when the movement itself formed, it was amongst the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists that Pissarro was actually referred to in his time as both the father and the grandfather of the movement. He was also, he was not a wealthy man, but he was still described as the most generous of the group in virtually every way possible. He was considered a mentor to many of these young artists. So I would certainly count him as the father. And in fact, we have that, presented as an argument in the exhibition, with a section of the exhibition called Pissarro, Mentor and Mentee, where we see his influence on not only the Impressionists, but the next generation, Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh, play out.
Just quickly, what influence did the expanding railway network and the invention of photography have on the Impressionists?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, I think the railway network was just, extremely important because the vast majority of the members central to the group, we might say the romantic impressionists, or the impressionists who engage with the natural landscape rather than the urban impressionists, they were travelling to far-flung places throughout France, and that kind of travel and those sort of painting excursions simply weren't possible unless you had the means to be transported there or transport yourself there prior to this kind of train travel. So it allowed these artists to travel to the beloved places that are recorded in these, magnificent works.
And photography, I would imagine, because it was capturing images as they were, it, in a way, freed them up from having to be ultra realistic, of having to do photographic type captures. They could be, they were free to paint the impression of what they were seeing.
Yeah, and I think there were a lot of social, cultural, scientific developments that were taking place that were leaning much more towards modern life, even if we consider, the mass urbanization of Paris that was taking place. All of these new technologies were leading artists to say, well, hang on, I'm not so interested in these historical subjects. I'm far more interested in this very dynamic change that is happening in the world around me. How can I capture this immediacy and this movement and this dynamism, which I think is certainly reflected in the more urban-leaning impressionists, many of whom didn't even like being referred to as impressionists, more so as realists, who were really fascinated by, the city's haussmanization, the divisions that occurred between inner Paris and the outer suburbs, and we see all of that recorded in this exhibition as well. But I think in terms of photography, another interesting point that we've chosen to highlight in this exhibition, the very final corridor shows photographic portraits of every single artist in the show, which the curator, Katie Hansen, was actually surprised that we were able to source photographs of absolutely everyone, including the Barbizon school painters and Boudin, for example. But this cult of photography that was really propelled by figures like Nadar were resulting in opportunities for these artists to, these are our first artist celebrities who are recorded in photographs, who can have their image alongside their work in terms of promotion and distribution of art. So that's hugely important to consider as well.
I think arguably some of the most beautiful paintings produced by the Impressionist school, I know that's not a very attractive term, but let's just call them the Impressionist group, are from Morisot and Cassatt. Two women. Beautiful paintings. I'm wondering, and Morisot was the only woman to appear in that first exhibition in 1874. Although the exhibition does not put undue emphasis on them, it does serve as a reminder that there were women involved.
Of course, yes. No, it's extremely important. And I mean, not to say that these women didn't face prejudices and challenges, but it's also important to acknowledge the financial background of these two women that allowed them to take up urban space and to mix with artists in spaces that had previously and really were continuing to be masculine zones. They weren't spaces for women to occupy, but they're, both women come from very wealthy families, so that really enabled them to, at a time when the state-funded art school wouldn't admit women, for them to be educated in other ways, primarily through private tutoring. And that wasn't available to all women at this time. So there were certainly things that limited these two women, particularly these unbelievable arguments at the time. Critics predominantly sort of trying to discredit the movement would argue that it was inherently feminine and therefore not worthy of our consideration, which is, quite interesting because clearly it was coming from a place of feeling threatened, the establishment feeling threatened.
Okay. You brought it up, so I'm going to just ask quickly about critics.
Yes.
One of the things so amusing about the relationship that critics had, not just with the first exhibition, but with the whole run of 8 shows that they did, was the critical disdain. Not all of them, obviously, but there was a lot of them. There was a lot of critical snobbery about what they were doing, and of course we get the term Impressionism, not so much from the painting,
Yes.
the Monet painting,
But from a
but from the
critic,
comment from Louis Leroy,
That's right.
who
Yeah.
said it was just like daubs of like a wallpaper.
Yes.
They were just
A mere impression.
Yeah, they were that's right. So, in a nutshell, what do you think the Impressionist success of the school says about critics and how, in the end, how utterly useless they are, apart from the occasional coining of a term that they didn't intend?
Yes. I mean, I think it isn't surprising because it's something that history repeats itself, and artists who are doing new things that aren't understood or known, there's always going to be backlash and criticism. That's the beauty of the art world, where if you're creating something that's divisive, you're probably doing something right.
Okay, final question, and it's a question I like to ask again and again, because I always get a slightly different answer, and that is that, especially now that we live in an age of constant distraction, what is the magic, what is the dynamic of standing in front of a painting and becoming immersed in that painting that can't be replicated in any other media form, whether old or new?
I mean, as you say, I'm sure everyone would answer this question different because it is a very subjective question, but I think for me personally, it is the immediacy of the work. You can't, I mean, I'd been looking at photographs of these works for years and years and years, and, you know, was already completely taken with many of the ones that had, you know, that similarly affected me when they arrived here. But what I love when we uncrate the works are those rare works that perhaps, you know, on a slide in a PowerPoint didn't jump out to you in the same way as when it sort of hits you like a slap in the face, in a good way, when they arrive and they come out of their crates. And I do think that there is something to be said. You cannot replicate that feeling because these works hold their history, and you can only really sense that history when you're physically with them. That, I believe that to be true. And, you know, I love, this is a very good question too for our conservators. You know, while we were uncrating these works, one of our conservators, Catherine Early, would call us over and say, I found my favourite piece of paint in this painting, and we would all crowd around and stare at something that you just can't glean from a photograph in a book or on a screen. And I think the ability to spend time with these works as well, you know, they've seen so much, and you feel that.
Yeah. This is the final question. It's like a supplementary question, but one of the great qualities of the Impressionist works is that they often capture almost candid images of people. And was it which one was it who did the one with the opera glasses? Was it?
Mary Cassatt.
Cassatt. That is a bizarre. I know it's not in the exhibition.
Yeah.
I wish it was, but so there's a woman looking.
Yes, in the opera box.
But there's someone in the background looking at her.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that's a movie.
It is. And I think that you find that particularly in the works by the urban impressionists, Manet, Degas, Cassatt, Raffaelli. Most of those works are very detailed portraits of urban life, but particularly the people. And there's this, actually Katie was talking about this Katie Hansen was talking about this in a tour yesterday. There's something about, that's something we can all connect to in those works. I often see people on the street that for some reason, I'll take a second look and I'll think, wow, there's something really powerful about that person, but I can't quite put my finger on it, but they just occupy space in a different way. And I think that is what these artists did in these urban spaces. Because of course the urban impressionists, or I should more respectfully say the realists, they took these works back to their studios. In that way they were different from some of the more traditional impressionists like Monet, who almost exclusively painted en plein air. But there is this magic you can relate to that. When I go and look at Manet's The Street Singer, I think I've seen women like that.
Well, that's another example, and that is in the exhibition.
It is, yes.
This is The Street Singer. It's not of her singing.
No, it's of her out the back door having a snack break.
Yeah, well, what's going on here?
Yeah, and also when Manet asked if he could paint her, when he was walking about and spotted this woman who caught her eye, she laughed at him. And so he said, well, okay, I'll get Victorine and we'll restage this.
Right.
But I love that as well, that rejection, that sort of, there's this grittiness to those works that I love.
Well, thank you again very much.
My pleasure.
I'm just going to grab just a very quick comment about my favourite, Eduardo Manet.
I love Manet's work. I think he is one of the best painters of people that I've ever seen in my life. There's this classical quality to his paintings, particularly his portraits of Victorine Meurent in the exhibition. And I mean, his works changed the course of modern art. I mean, the fact that Victorine also modelled for Olympia and Luncheon in the Grass, two textbook art historical images. I mean, I think he's fantastic.
I mean, a great painting always has a story.
Yes, exactly.
Or it suggests a story.
Yes, yeah.
Luncheon on the Grass. What's going on there? I mean, I know there's no answer to that question, but it's the questions that, well, what is going on here? And who's the chick in the background?
Yeah.
Why is she naked? Why is she looking straight at the viewer?
She's in the foreground, actually. She's the first thing you see.
Oh, no, the first one. But there's also a woman in the background,
yes,
is what I mean.
Yes,
there's also a woman in the background.
Yeah.
It's,
No, they're fantastic works because they're merging old and new in a way, and completely confusing their audience. But I love them. Yeah. I think they're fantastic, and I think they're still so shocking to people, which I love.